discuss this session, and we're just going to have a conversation. First of all, Chris, just maybe a bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. Do you mind a comment in the first place about Tim and Carla's station, because I think it's hugely important. I was lucky enough to get to speak at Black History Month last week, and I've got to say that as a sort of squat, middle-aged, white Scottish bloke, that's quite daunting. I see a minefield in front of me, and I know my intent, but I also know that my intent may come across wrongly, and we'll maybe talk about that a wee bit. But I was thinking about how we make arguments for EDI, and I think for many of us, we fall into this idea that it's just right, it's fair, and it's right. But there are other people for whom that's not quite the argument that talks to them. And the other two arguments I find myself making with people is the smart argument, the argument around if we're dealing with complex environments, we really do need to hear people's voices. And there's no point having a whole bunch of people who look exactly like me in a room sharing their thoughts on something, because what you actually need is the perspectives of people who see the problem differently. And the evidence on the wisdom of the crowd stuff says that you only get the wisdom of the crowd when you have diversity within the crowd. And the final thing, the final angle I ended up coming at on this is, if fairness doesn't really work for you, if smartness doesn't work for you, then finance probably does. And there's some lovely work that comes out of McKinsey about the impact of the more diversity you have at a board level, the more profitability that your organisation shows. And I know that talks to exec teams within the NHS as well. And the McKinsey stuff is where I found most of the stuff that I was interested in there. So I just really wanted to touch on that before we got into talking about whatever we end up talking about. You asked me about myself. What am I? I'm a squat, middle-aged Scottish emergency medicine consultant who did a bit of psychiatry before I went into emergency medicine, and was a governance lead for 10 years. And in my 10 years as a governance lead, I started to realise that there must be more to what's going on when things go wrong than just people who fail to follow process. And I started looking at the evidence base behind behaviour and the impact of behaviour in the workplace, and I started a thing called Civility Saves Lives, which is really a grassroots organisation dedicated to raising awareness of the impact of behaviour on team performance. And from that, I've had a whole bunch of stuff sort of spidered out. I'm part of the NHS steering group for health and well-being, and I've got to admit that sometimes I look at myself on that group and I think that there's another Chris Turner somewhere in the country who weeps into his cornflakes every morning going, this is my life's work and why have I not been invited? But it's a very interesting place to be, and I learn lots of stuff off people. And I get to travel around the country, and well, I did. And I get to go and talk to executives and people like that, and senior clinical bodies. And that's great. I've got to be part of the Anti-Bullying Alliance, which is slowly morphing into something which is more positive about the sort of good behaviours at work alliance. And it's been a heck of a journey, and fascinating. And it's a complete privilege to get the chance to come and talk about stuff. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's more than enough, Chris. Let's just see how the conversation flows. One of the things that you're really well known for nationally, and my guess is globally now, is the Civility Saves Lives Matter movement. Maybe just talk us through what motivated you to be involved in that from the start, and why it's important.
Well, I mean, we're just looking for a project, effectively. One of my juniors, a guy called Joe Farmer, came, and after he left, he wrote and he said, can I come and talk to you? And I don't know about you, but that horrifies me, this idea that somebody wants to come and talk some months after we've been working together, because it's very rare that they come and talk to you to tell you how awesome you were. There's usually a thing they want to talk about. And Joe came and talked, and actually, he just wanted a project, and he knew that I was interested in kind of odd things. And that's how we got into it. We talked about a whole bunch of different things. but we settled on civility saves lives. In fact, we spent a long time talking about the evidence behind negative behaviours, and we spent a long time thinking about what we were going to call it. And we were fairly seduced by the ideas of, don't be a dick, don't be a whatever, don't be a whatever bit of genitalia you want to think about. Because, that really does kind of appeal, doesn't it? Except nobody comes to work to be that person. And what happens is when you just put out there, don't be a dick, well, of course not. No one's trying to be that person. And what we wanted to talk about was the sort of the positive aspect of this. What benefits do you get by behaving in pro-social ways with the people around you? Unfortunately, a lot of that is very measurable, particularly the stuff around working memory and what we're able to deal with in this complex adaptive world that we work in, what we're able to deal with at a given moment. And when people are rude to us, it activates our fight and flight, and it closes down our ability to think, and we end up not performing at the level that we would like to. And that's led in a whole bunch of directions. Do you mind if I talk about something slightly askance for a second or two?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been looking at recently, in another world, I researched the development of wisdom in clinicians. And that's like trying to capture, dry sand between your fingers. It's a difficult concept, but sitting alongside that is this idea of doing the right thing and what makes an action the right thing for people. Because one of the things one of the triggers for this was I was having dinner with President of one of the Royal Colleges, and that's this kind of weird rarefied air that I seem to get to live in sometimes these days. And it was a few months ago, and we were in Belfast, and I had dinner with him, and he said, "Chris, my boy," and I love it when people call me my boy. I genuinely do like being called my boy. "Chris, my boy, I just wish everybody would do the right thing." And I thought, that's fascinating. You think people are deliberately not doing the right thing. And if you think about it, for you, for me, Pete, for anybody else who's watching, how often have we deliberately chosen to do the wrong thing in the moment? How often have we said, that's the wrong thing to do, so I'm going to do it? Because we don't. As human beings, that's way too dissonant. What we do is the right thing for us in that situation, given the information that we've got. And you can kind of start to split this up. And this is a kind of weird direction to go in, but bear with me for a second or two. Hopefully it'll make some sense. And it's about ethics. And when people are taught ethics in healthcare, they get taught about autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. But there are completely different ways of looking at ethics. That's just one model. There's another model of normative ethics, which says what made something the right thing. And it splits into, broadly speaking, 3 groups. So an action is the right thing to an individual, either because they are consequentialists. And for a consequentialist, the only thing that matters is that you get the end result. So you got the kids to school on time, that you went through 3 red lights and knocked over 2 cyclists doesn't matter. To the consequentialist, the only thing that matters is you get the end result. And you can see how we drive the development of consequentialists in the NHS, particularly in exec suites, particularly when we put a lot of pressure on people around targets. And when I worked in mid-staffs, it was all about the finance. That was all that those guys were measured on. So you can see how we drive people into being consequentialists. So that's one group. There's a second group who are people who will have done the right thing if they follow the rules. And they're people often who are constrained by a culture which doesn't let them stray outside the rules, the SOP or the guideline or whatever. And they are called deontologists. And one of the things that I think is very difficult for a lot of senior clinicians is to understand that junior clinicians, and whether they're nurses or doctors, junior staff are extremely bound by the rules, and they're not allowed to step outside it, even when they think it's the right thing to do. Doctors are allowed to step out more than nurses, And you can see this in how the NMC and the GMC work together. But people are still doing the right thing according to what they're allowed to do. And then there's this third group, and the third group are displaying something called phronesis, and that's with a PH. And phronesis is about taking in all the pieces of information and making your decision about what you think the right thing to do is. But of course, you have to be functioning within an environment that gives you the permission to do what you think is the right thing. And that's the sort of privileged position that a lot of senior doctors in particular find themselves in. And an example of phronesis is, say you went away with a friend to a weekend away, and you guys went away and you arrived and it was a reunion, and they realized that they'd forgotten their stuff. It's black tie, they've forgotten their black tie stuff. So they go out and they buy stuff and they come back. When they come back, they go into the bathroom, they get changed, and they open the door and they go, ta-da, here I am. What do you think? And you look at it, and what they're wearing looks awful to you. It looks absolutely terrible. There's nothing good about this. But you know that your friend is really looking forward to this. In fact, you know your friend's quite fragile. You know your friend has had 6 months of a really hard time. They've been really looking forward to this. They need to go tonight. You also know that if you say you don't like it, they won't go. So you have a decision to make. Now, I'm not saying what the right and wrong decision here is, but for many people, they would turn around and they would say, you look great, let's go. And what they're doing there is lying. We can call it a white lie, we can call it anything we like, but you were asked what you thought, and we replied, you look great, let's go. And that's phronesis. That's understanding that there are certain things, like lying is something that we tell people to never do. And yet you have to do it sometimes, or some of us feel we have to. And for me, beginning to understand that everybody is trying to do the right thing, but we're doing it with different constraints and with different permissions, is quite an important starting place in thinking about stuff. Because if we do that, then we're not assuming that people are bad. We're assuming that people are good, doing their best in a circumstance. And it was just one of the things I wanted to bring here today, is just been thinking about it a lot. We've done some research into it. And there are a group of people who want to do one thing, but they're not allowed to do it by the organisation. And they are middle tier medical and nursing staff primarily. And it's a really dissonant, uncomfortable place for them. And I just wanted to talk about it because it might be useful to some people out there. So apologies for me jumping off on that.
No, Chris, we could listen to you speak all day. We've got 5 minutes left. Just another question. So, I mean, that's a whole a pile of stuff which I have to say I'm in full agreement with. What would your advice be to leaders to try and create, you know, the right environment? So, you know, for this type of stuff.
All right. So there are a couple of elegant experiments over the last few years looking at this idea. You know, when you're told to try and imagine something from somebody else's perspective, it's a great idea, and it'd be lovely if it worked, but it only works a tiny little bit. If we want to understand something from other people's perspectives, it is not enough to try to imagine what it looks like from their perspective. And it's simply not enough, because of course we swing our focus around, we look at something from another perspective, and we do it with all our unconscious biases still completely in play. And we think we can see it from their perspective. Of course we can't. So there is no way around this. Now, actually, I think Tim was talking about this as well. There's no way around it. If you want to know what people think, we need to ask them. And then we need to give them the chance to tell us the answer. And it'd be just lovely if we could skip past that, but no one's got a way of skipping past it.
Brilliant. Okay, and then, you know, just bringing, so the title of the session was Small Acts Have Great Impact. Talk us through, because me, you and Nick were talking last week, and you mentioned this and it struck both me and Nick. So talk us through small acts of great impact.
So my first small act is the attitudinal thing, that understand that almost everybody is trying to do the right thing. So just changing perspective a little bit. The second bit is, do you know, when you want to know what's going on in somebody else's head or what made that the right thing to do for them, we need to ask them and we need to listen to them. And the third thing is about good days at work and great days at work. And what I'd say to you is just a rhetorical thing very quickly, is when you had a great day at work, what was going on? And then how were people treating each other? Because my bet is that people were treating each other well. And what the research shows is that the number one factor determining engagement at work and well-being at work are the people around us, and specifically our immediate line manager. And that's kind of frustrating on a level, isn't it? Because if our immediate line manager is in a bad mood, it means that we're likely to be in a bad mood, because it kind of rains down. But it's also wonderfully, wonderfully empowering, because the most important person in the people that we directly line manage is us and how we treat them. And when we treat people well, when we treat people respectfully, when we listen to them and give them time and space, we facilitate them being more engaged with work, so you get more discretionary effort and you get that win-win of the great workplace. And I think that's a lovely thing to know and a really nice thing for us to be getting towards the end on, saying that we have the ability to make other people's day at work so much better.
Brilliant. Now we've got 1 minute left. So what's your take-home message for everybody who's listening in or watches it back on record? What's the one thing that we can all do? I include myself, that as a line manager of quite a few people. What's the one thing we can do?
I think it's know that behaviour counts, and when we're kind to those people who are coming to us, we facilitate them performing at a higher and higher level, and that's a win for patients and it's a win for staff as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Thank you for that session. We could talk to you for absolutely hours. For everybody who's listening in, you know, Google Civility Saves Lives. Chris he's got some great YouTube talks, including a really, really excellent TED talk. So many thanks to you, Chris.
Thank you, Pete. It's an absolute pleasure.
Much appreciated. And do stay on for our next speaker if you don't have to rush back to the emergency department. Brilliant. So thank you for that session. Chris is one of my idols, heroes, so it's an absolute pleasure to speak to him. I'm going to move us on to the last session of the day.